So hello there and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast, a show where we talk all of the latest news, gossip and events in the world of Formula 1, and we relay that back to you for your listening or viewing pleasure, depending of course on which platform you choose to follow us on. And guys, after that small little interlude that we had, where we had a little bit of news involving the announcement of the Las Vegas Grand Prix, and of course, if you are new to the channel, you can check out our thoughts on that video. But nonetheless, we are back. It's race week again. Formula 1 very much coming thick and fast at us with our third Grand Prix of the 2022 season. And we are going back to Melbourne in Australia, the first time in 3 years that F1 will be hosting a race in Australia. And joining us on this episode of the podcast, as usual, one of my co-hosts, one of the team at DNF1, Courtney Pine. Courtney, first of all, how are you doing? Are you okay?
Yeah, it's great to be back. Obviously looking forward to Australia. I think, after a couple of races, we've got a good idea of where the teams are, and I think we're just going to really get stuck into the season now, so I can't wait.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And we'll also have the very honourable privilege of being joined by a very special guest indeed. Formula 1 journalist, MotoGP journalist and Formula E journalist. It's fair to say that if he's got wheels and you can race it, he loves to talk about it and write about it as well. It's Ben Hunt joining us. Ben, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the DNF1 F1 podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, all good, thank you. Yeah, not in Melbourne this week, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to talk to you guys.
Yeah, and we absolutely appreciate that. And I imagine that the only solace of not being able to watch F1 cars live is having to go through that grueling long flight all the way over to Melbourne.
Yeah, it took me 33 hours to get back from Saudi Arabia. And the thought of doing another 26 plus to get to Oz was just a bit too much. But no, it's a shame not to be there. It's a great place, great venue to kick off a season. Better place than Bahrain, in my opinion, to start a World Championship event. Shame not to be there, but of course it's only 3 days and I'll be doing all the others, so not to worry too much.
Yeah, and do you know what? I absolutely am glad that you said that, Ben, because like yourself, I'm a bit of an F1 traditionalist. I think Courtney might agree with me as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like the F1 season has started until we turn up to Melbourne. At Albert Park for the first race. I mean, I love Bahrain. It's a great circuit, but it just doesn't feel like the season opener to me. Albert Park.
Yeah, it's very much like that. I mean, traditionally you had, if you think Australia was, the one where they would start and people would be like, wow, Melbourne, the other side of the world, it's got that wow effect for a World Championship event. You tell them that you're starting in Bahrain, people go, right, okay, where's that? No one's got an idea. Second race, Saudi Arabia, and people going, hang on a minute, I thought this was like some kind of bona fide World Championship event. And, it's not until you get to Melbourne and those races come in. And of course, Melbourne, then we've got Imola and Miami, and they're three very big races, which will obviously signal the start of the season. It's like before, I guess, when we used to have Barcelona, the first Spanish race, and it used to be, the European seasons now.
Yeah.
This is where F1 comes thick and fast and we're really getting into the season. And I think that's this moment now Melbourne, although it's miles away, of course. But I feel that this is the start of the season.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think given what we've seen in the first two races, it could be a Grand Prix that could breathe new life into this championship, depending on what some of the teams will do. I know there's probably a few teams, particularly in the midfield, that will obviously want to overturn their lesser fortunes, if you like, than some of the others. And of course, we have the likes of Ferrari and Red Bull starting off really, really well between the two of them, and obviously want to keep that going. But on the subject of the Australian Grand Prix, I think it's quite... I guess it's one of those sort of full circle moments. It's quite wholesome because... this time, 2 years ago, obviously there was a huge debacle at the 2020 Australian Grand Prix, which never actually happened because it was coincided with the start of the pandemic. And F1 really, it was kind of the game of chicken, I suppose, between themselves and the F1 organisers. I imagine the media, people like yourself, Ben, probably weren't comfortable being there. The drivers obviously didn't feel that they were happy to be there. I think Lewis Hamilton, I think that's where the cash is king phrase that he famously used. And I was reading an article that you wrote, I believe this morning, or it might have been yesterday, on this subject. Now, I found it quite interesting to see how you mentioned how far F1 had come along since that moment, and obviously how well they've done during the pandemic. I mean, for the benefit of those that haven't read your article, would you mind sharing some light on some of those huge?
Yeah, I mean, as it stands at the moment, we're 754 days since the race was cancelled, and that's today, Tuesday, the 5th of April. So that's a lot of time. But then during that, we've had 42. Did I say 42? I think 41 or 41. I think F1 races.
Yeah.
We've squeezed 2 very good seasons in. Certainly last season, in the middle of a pandemic, whereby industries, you call up any call center at the moment and you can't get through to anyone. I know this because I'm chasing a passport, but everything's COVID. Due to COVID, we can't do anything. F1 managed to get 2 seasons worth of races, out during the pandemic, and we started with 2 flying races for this year. I think that I criticise F1 a lot and the FIA, but I think that they deserve praise for the way that they did get those seasons done and underway. I work in football as well, and football was put on hold for such a long period of time. Then the races the matches were happening behind closed doors, and that's just in the UK. F1 was moving to all these different countries. You're looking at 2,000 tons of freight. The logistics of 5,000 people going to each race. There's a lot of COVID tests. There's a lot of protocols, but they managed to get it done. And I think that was the key, managed to get back to business. All the teams are still in business. No one went bust. There's so many positives that came out of that period. And it was great. It's great that the sport managed to keep on going even in the middle of that pandemic. And of course, yes, that race, I remember being in Australia at the time, and it was farcical. It was really late. Didn't sleep actually, because when the news came through that McLaren had a positive test, we was just due to play football. We usually play football as a group of journalists, and it was like the worst possible time, just about to kick off in this game, and the news come through, and we're like, oh, right, okay. All had to stop, had to do some work, chase it up, and of course, then it's a game of what's going to happen next. And F1 didn't want to pull the plug on the race because it meant that they wouldn't get the race fee. If the promoter did the same, then they would be eligible to pay a race fee, and no one wanted to do that. And you had this farcical situation of the gates being closed on the Friday. And I remember waking up and local radio stations were saying, the advice is go to the track, go. You've got your tickets, everything's going to go on. And I was just thinking at the time, this is crazy. There's no way this race is going on. And I've got to be honest, my biggest concern was getting home, because I thought the world would go into lockdown and we wouldn't be getting home. And it was some hastily booked flights and sort of getting out of town. But it did feel like we left Melbourne in a bit of a mess. It's like F1 turned up, their COVID rates started going up, and then F1 ran off. And it just felt as if we'd done a bit of a dirty on Melbourne, and then obviously not going back there for so long. And I think it's key that we need a good race this weekend, and we need everything to go well and everyone to have a good time, just to heal that process, because it wasn't great the way we left things. And I'm just praying for a safe, interesting race. I want another good one, as we all do. Yeah,
absolutely right. And it's a really good article. I recommend for those of you who haven't read it to check it out. I'll leave a link in the description on the video. It's a lot of great points that you've mentioned, Ben, and I think it's important, as you said, for F1 to have a successful weekend at Melbourne, have an exciting race. Hopefully some of the reprofiling that they've done at Albert Park, particularly in the middle sector, should create more overtaking opportunities. I think I read somewhere in the week that they're going to have as many as 4 DRS zones.
You're right.
I mean, that is huge.
Ridiculous, right?
That's
where it goes wrong, because as we know, that's artificial overtakes. And I guess it's now, I'm slipping back to this whole, I can't help feeling that so many decisions are being made for, and I hate this phrase, but like the Netflix F1 fans who have sort of just joined, but it's artificial, it's more fakery. And we watch a DRS overtake and we just simply think, oh, right, okay, it's DRS. It's not really, it's not like a proper overtake. Do you know what I mean? And now if we've got 4 of them, it's just going to be, I'm not sure. Jury's out. Let's see.
Yeah, it is a bit of a concern, because I think what we saw in Saudi Arabia, particularly with the double DRS, obviously with Max and Charles Leclerc, how they can sort of play games with each other and try to negotiate the appropriate time to actually have DRS versus not having DRS. Almost as if you didn't want to get to the final corner first because you knew it was a slam dunk overtake into turn 1. And I think in Australia, I think you're right, Ben, I'm not the biggest fan of DRS. I understand why it has been introduced over the turbo hybrid era. I think it needed it to some level of degree. But now with these new cars, the way that they're a lot more simple. Obviously, there's not much turbulent air or wake following them, which allows the cars to follow a bit more closely. I think this is the perfect opportunity now to sort of review DRS and maybe not necessarily get rid of it altogether, but lessen it to a certain degree where it's becomes less powerful, so that overtaking isn't always a guarantee and cars become vulnerable. Because I mean, it's fun to watch, but I think too much of overtaking can also be a bit of a problem, as much as none at all.
Agree.
Courtney, what are your thoughts on the change at Albert Park? Do you think it's going to be a bit overkill in terms of overtakes, or do you think perhaps somewhere like Albert Park it might actually be a blessing?
I think it is going to be an overkill. I just think, the organisers at Melbourne are just very keen for there to be more overtaking at the circuit, because as much as we enjoy, it is like Ben, you touched on it earlier on. I think it's just that excitement of the new season when you go there and you got like these brand new cars, flying around that street circuit. It's one of the highlights of the season for me. The one downfall of, generally speaking, has been the lack of overtaking. So obviously they want to turn that around, but it is like they're overcompensating. That's how it feels. It's as if they're overcompensating, and then it's like, it was surprised me that they're just going to experiment this season. If it turns out to be overkill, then maybe they'll like cut down a zone or two next season. So yeah, I agree with the pair of you. I'm hoping it doesn't affect the racing, but if they do get it wrong this year, I'm sure they can make it better for the 2023 and beyond. Yeah,
no, it's a very good point, Courtney. Obviously, we're going to a street circuit, like we did in Jeddah, although two very different street circuits, it must be said. But that being said, qualifying has not always been critical at a circuit like Albert Park. I think I was reading a stat the other day saying that since 2012, only Lewis Hamilton has won from pole in 2015, and he's been on pole 7 times in that period. I think it was only Sebastian Vettel in 2013 that broke that trend. So, based on that, should we not be concerned if we see either Max or Charles get pole position? Is there another winner potentially in the field for this weekend?
Yeah, maybe. I didn't realise it was that. I mean, the only thing I would say that is that during all those races, it would have been the first race, so there would have been reliability issues and other things which you could account for shaking up the order. But that said, I mean, Mercedes have always been pretty good from the start, haven't they? So it's a bit of a surprise to see that or hear that stat. I don't know. I think for me, the big thing is that we've had this gap in between Jeddah and Melbourne, and all the noise coming out of Mercedes was, we know what the problem is. Obviously, if you know what the problem is, that's the biggest problem to have. You've solved it. It's just you need the time to fix it. And of course, you've had that gap, that 10 days or whatever it is, to fix that problem. And I'm convinced that they'll turn up with improvements which will make them quicker and resolve some of this problem that they've got. So perhaps they could be in the mix. I think the only other concern is the fact that engine doesn't seem to be as good as their rivals. So maybe that's something which could affect things. But I think that you see a stronger Mercedes definitely this time around.
I certainly hope so, because for me, I'm a self-confessed Ferrari fan. Obviously, I'm enjoying what they're doing right now. But for me, I feel like it needs another element to this battle between Max and Charles. It needs the Lewis Hamilton or perhaps a George Russell element to it to kind of spring it into life. I mean, we've got Perez and Carlos Sainz that are doing a fine job at the moment. I'm sure they have aspirations to do a bit more. But it seems right now the championship is already starting to write its rivalry, and that one seems to be Max versus Charles right now. So perhaps we need Mercedes, hopefully for their sake, to find a bit more performance with these new cohort of upgrades. I read that they're introducing a new rear wing and possibly some accompanying changes to the floor to help with the porpoising issue that they've been having. Yeah. And this is quite a huge issue that they've been having with porpoising. I don't think people actually understand how significant a problem this is, because obviously with these ground effect cars, the underbody downforce that they tend to generate and how significant that is, Mercedes just aren't able to unlock the true potential of their car. I mean, Ben, in your perspective, I know we've already alluded on Mercedes bringing some upgrades. Hopefully they'll be a bit more competitive this weekend. But realistically speaking, how long do you think it might possibly be until we see Mercedes in a position where they could challenge Ferrari and Red Bull on merit? Is it perhaps the first European race in Imola, or perhaps Spain, or perhaps a little bit longer than that?
I did an Instagram Q&A on the way back from Jeddah, and someone asked me that very question. I really can't see. This is going to come back and bite me, isn't it? But I was saying British Grand Prix. I think those two drivers, Lewis and George, will be in contention to win the British Grand Prix. I don't want to say they won't win this weekend, because obviously they are bringing up updates and everything. But I just think that the gap that we've seen Red Bull and Ferrari pull on Mercedes, that is a huge gap. That is quite a lot of work to find, a lot of time to get out of that car. And look at Lewis in Saudi, and it didn't look good, did it? George was obviously doing as best as he could and had a credible finish, but for Lewis, it was very disappointing. Come home, didn't even know he'd scored a point. Is there a point for 10th place? That tells you all you need to know. And that's someone, 7-time world champion, who drags everything out of a car which he gets in. So perhaps it is going to take a little bit longer. Perhaps there is no magic fix. And as I say, for me, I think Silverstone will be probably their earliest win, and I hope I'm wrong, because like you say, I do want to see them winning. I want a 3-way fight for the title. I don't want two teams just to be in it again, because it makes it a bit dull. Ideally more, like to see another team there, but I think it'll take a little while. And of course, if we're looking at mid-season now, that means that they could already be out of the title race by then, which would be a sad thing. You don't want to see that happen. So I hope I'm wrong, but maybe Silverstone.
I don't think that's too unrealistic a deadline for them. I think that they've mentioned quite often that they need to find a deeper solution, and that's going to require some time and research, a time which, owing to the ATR regulations, Mercedes don't actually have compared to Red Bull and Ferrari. They have significantly less, and that won't change until we get to the summer break. So they're going to have to be working really hard with what they have, not only to sort of catch up with Red Bull and Ferrari, but I hope that they don't pull further away. So that's going to be the task for them. Courtney, on the subject of Lewis Hamilton, he obviously had a very difficult Saudi Grand Prix qualifying. He himself and Mercedes went with a gamble on setup. It didn't work, and Lewis ended up getting knocked out in Q1, amazingly. His worst performance on merit in qualifying for, 13 years or so, something crazy like that. Completely unheard of him. And then in the race itself, he had a fairly solid race, but there was a crucial moment, of course, when perhaps he could have pitted before the VSC and the safety car, the pit lane was closed. And, it was sort of that to and from between him and the team where they reacted too late. What are you expecting from Lewis this weekend? Should we just expect him to just dust that one off and then bounce back as he always does? Or is this the start of perhaps an underlying issue that perhaps is affecting everyone at the team and may, unlikely, but may affect Lewis's decision-making and his driving?
I think we're seeing throughout Lewis's career that, obviously everyone wants to have, the fastest car and win races and championships, but there's definitely a part of Lewis that, enjoys the underdog title. I mean, if you're British and you don't enjoy the underdog title, there's something wrong with you. It's ingrained in our culture. So there is, he does enjoy that. I think he enjoys being, I think he said it before, he enjoys being the hunter rather than the hunted. So there is a part of that where I feel he will embrace the challenge. This season reminds me of the 2009 McLaren, where he described his car as a dog of a car. So he's been in this situation before. He's got experience, and I think he's much more level-headed, these days. So, and he'll help develop the car. I think having a partnership with George Russell as well will really help the team develop the car as well. It's just with Mercedes, it's not only the the actual aero performance of the car's the issue, it's the engine. I think we've seen rumours circulating that Mercedes aren't running anywhere near full power because they have reliability concerns, but it seems like most of the manufacturers are having issues. We've seen the Red Bull powertrains having problems. So are Mercedes being they know that reliability is the most important thing, so it'd be interesting to see if they turn a wick up in the coming races.
Yeah, that's a good point, Courtney, because I think when it comes to Mercedes issues with the engine or so, that what's been reported, I tend to look at the performance of their customer teams, who may not necessarily, they might be running to the same spec as what Mercedes prescribed to them, or they may decide to gamble a little bit more. It's up to them and how they do it. But usually on how they perform in a straight line and how the engine's working for them, for me, that kind of tells a picture of where Mercedes are. And it's the same for the Ferrari-powered teams. And obviously, we're quite limited with what we can get from Red Bull powertrains or Honda, whichever one you want to call it, or however it's branded these days between themselves and AlphaTauri. So I don't think we can understate how significant that could be for their performance. Obviously, that is just as important for them. It may be more so, perhaps in an era where other than the electrical changes that they can introduce before the summer break, there's not really going to be any other opportunity for them to change anything on that for the next few years or so. Ben, I'm intrigued to get your thoughts on George Russell, because Courtney and I, we're big fans of George, and it doesn't surprise us that George has taken to his new life at Mercedes like a duck to water. I mean, he's been involved with the team for such a long time now. He's always done a lot of testing programs. There's not much that Mercedes don't know about George Russell and vice versa. So what have you made to George Russell's start so far with the Mercedes team?
Yeah, I think it was a very easy transition for him. I think the biggest thing was just getting used to just different colours almost. It was like, he'd been doing so many sim days there. He knew all the staff, knew all the procedures. There was not really too much for him to worry about. I think once he got that first race over and done with and sort of did okay as he did, I think that was it. He's up and running now. I don't think he's one that feels the pressure. When we spoke to him in Bahrain, he said, this is a perfect opportunity for me to go up against Lewis because everything's reset and, I'm in a good place and everything else and there's no pressure. So, he's feeling good. He's feeling comfortable. It's good that he's there and Mercedes have finally given him a chance. I think he did a lot of learning at Williams in terms of building a team around him and giving them the feedback. And I think that's the biggest difference that I saw during his time at Williams. I mean, forget all the qualifying and the results and everything else, was the actual feedback and the direction he was giving the team. And, he's come into that team. And, I was quite lucky. I spent a race in race control at Mercedes, Austin last year. And you get to listen to the driver's feedback. And so Lewis is constantly on, do this, do that. I need a bit of this. And constantly seeking information and finding out where he's losing time. When you compare it to someone like Valtteri, who gives very little feedback, very quiet over the radio, and you compare that to George, and George is more like Lewis, and you think that's a good sign. It shows that he's confident. It's good for the team. It's good for him and Lewis to work together and share information. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's good to see. I think that he's confident. I think he'll go places. And I think Mercedes were totally right in picking him over Valtteri.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I'm slightly jealous about that experience at Mercedes at Austin.
It's really good.
I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing. But I think that's a really, really good point that you've made about George. He's very similar to Lewis in his approach when he's driving the car and obviously getting that, taking that analytical approach. I mean, when I watch George Russell, inside the car and outside the car, I look at him and I just think work ethic and a strong mentality, perhaps one beyond his years, that is certainly going to serve him going forward and perhaps could be something that might separate him over a few others of his generation in the future when Mercedes are back to where they belong at the front of the field. So it's certainly good signs. I'm hoping to see more of that from George Russell. One thing I would mention, or probably would ask you, Ben, seeing as you have that inside track with George, is do you feel personally that because Mercedes aren't fighting at the front right now, there's a bit less pressure on George Russell to sort of deliver immediately, and as a result might allow him to develop at a quicker rate than he would do if he was expected to win Grand Prix or be on the podium every single race as we expected from Valtteri?
Maybe. I think it's the pressure of dealing with being on the podium and fighting for wins. We saw it, didn't we, in Bahrain when he filled in for Lewis. Can we read too much into that? Probably not. I think that's the only thing that we haven't seen. George under pressure fighting for wins. What's he going to be like in that scenario? As far as I'm concerned, he can do it though. I think he'll be good. It's good to see, isn't it? Him, Lando. We do need Lewis there as well, and it'd be great to see all three of them fighting for wins. That would be great.
Absolutely right. And the future of British racing certainly looking bright right now in George Russell's hands, and hopefully
I must say though, we haven't seen George Russell against Max Verstappen yet.
Yeah, that's true.
Very true.
Yeah,
that would be intriguing because I think we all know that George has the pace. If he has the right car, he can challenge Max. And you know, it's the same thing. You know, we've seen people say, oh, you know, the rivalry between Max and Charles is different. We're only a couple of races in.
I agree.
It completely changes when you go further down the season. So if Mercedes catch up and you've got Max up against, you know, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, honestly, if this happens, we are in for such a treat this season.
I agree with you, because people are very quick to go on about how great Max is with Charles and how different it was. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, all right, whatever. Rewind 12 months in Bahrain, and when Max went off track to overtake Lewis, and you know, he gave that position back. You know, he just did it. You know, there wasn't any of this bickering, rowing, you know, brake testing or anything like that. That will come later in the year, you know. So, like you say, only 2 races gone. Let's see what it's like at the end of the season. You know, let's wait till we're at 22 and see if they're still friends.
Well, this is it, and you know, ever since the Max versus Charles debate began at the start of the season when they were battling each other, we constantly saw that video of them two following that collision they had at karting, and their 2 different interpretations of that incident. I think everybody's seen by now, and it's a lot of similarities to the early stages of the battle last season between Max and Lewis. You know, there was an element of respect. It was hard racing, sometimes a bit over the limit, until we had that catalyst moment at Silverstone where the two came together, and of course the rest of the season was written from there. With that, are we expecting similar hallmarks with Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, or you know, because how long can these two keep going back and forth as they have done in Bahrain and Saudi? As fun as that is to watch, how much longer can these two keep going before eventually something goes wrong and then all of a sudden the gloves are off, as it were last year?
I don't know. It depends on what happens, doesn't it? In the next race, it could be all decided there. You know, if the two come together and there's a big old bust up. I don't know. I think Max as world champion is slightly different. His mentality. I think once you've got that first one under your belt, then you become a little bit more relaxed. You realise that everything's not won at that first corner, and certainly as you get older and more experienced, then you tend to, dare I say, be a little bit more wiser with your moves and perhaps less aggressive when perhaps you make better judgment, I should say. Maybe we're seeing that with Max at the moment. I hope so, because that will make him a better driver, in my opinion. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. I think it was Anthony Davidson last year on Sky F1. He was saying that, I think it was at the Spanish Grand Prix, where Max went for that move at turn 1 on Lewis, and Lewis sort of backed out of it because he knew there'd be a collision if he stayed in there. And he mentioned, he described Max as like driving like a young, raw Lewis Hamilton. And obviously perhaps in time, you know, Max could hone his skills and be a bit more like Lewis Hamilton is today. I mean, that would be a huge compliment to Max, but maybe we are seeing a little bit of that, although it's very early days, and we're seeing a different Charles Leclerc as well to some degree. You know, he's a little bit more consistent. If he keeps that going, then this could be a year where who knows what could happen for him. But on the subject of Max versus Charles, assuming that is going to be the battle this weekend for the victory, who do we think is more likely to win? Are Ferrari or Red Bull looking like they might fancy the race this weekend? Because it's so hard to call, considering how differently both teams have approached the first 2 races on car setup, and yet they seem to come together almost identically on the track.
Yeah, it's difficult to call, isn't it? I think you can just pick any name out, you know, out of the 2. I don't know how it's going to pan out. I think second practice is going to be, or first and second practice are going to be interesting to see, more so second than the first. I don't know. Honestly, can't call it. You know, I think I'd like to see someone like Carlos win that, just to throw another, element in. I think he deserves it. I think he's a cracking driver. You know, I'd love to see that.
Well, that's a really good point. And it's a nice segue into that, actually, with Sainz, because I was going to talk about Perez and Sainz. And whilst Sergio Perez, of course, we'll talk about in a moment, he seems quite happy with the job he's doing, although he has been a bit unlucky in the first 2 races. If it wasn't for that safety car, he would have been leading against Leclerc. It might have been a different race in Jeddah after the pit stop. And then, of course, if it wasn't for the retirement at the end of the race, he would have been on the podium in Bahrain. So we'll come to Perez in a moment. But on the subject of Carlos Sainz, he has much bigger desires right now in the short term. Obviously, he wants to beat his teammate. He wants to do what he did last season, but in a manner where there's no question on the merit of it. You know, it's not a case of, oh, well, Charles had a few poor performances or bad luck here or there. He wants to go out and be on par with his teammate so that he's not considered the number 2. So with all that being said, what are your thoughts on this one, Courtney, with Carlos Sainz? Do you feel that he could potentially be in danger already of falling into that supporting role, or do you think that we're going to see a bit more of him this weekend to the point where he could challenge for the win against his teammate and possibly Max Verstappen and Perez as well?
Yeah, I think for Carlos, he hasn't been happy with his own performances. I think, he knows he's got a race-winning car there, so he's putting that pressure on himself. He certainly has the ability to challenge. I do feel that Charles Leclerc does have that, that little bit of stardust in those moments in a battle against Max Verstappen. But, even if you go back to when they were together at Toro Rosso, Carlos Sainz was probably Max Verstappen's most difficult teammate. So we know that Carlos Sainz has the ability to do so, but he's going to have to, at least win a race in the coming races, because if we do have a tight battle between Red Bull and Ferrari are going to have to make a decision, because it's clear who the number 1 driver is at Red Bull.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, what are your thoughts on this one with Carlos Sainz? Is there a metaphorical deadline out there for him to try and demonstrate that he can compete on Charles's level as he's demonstrated in the first 2 races? Or is it one of those where perhaps Binotto at Ferrari just needs to let this one play out and then step in at a certain point in the season?
I think he's probably happy, Binotto, with both his drivers and the way they're driving and delivering. I think that it's quite a harmonious team. I think they get on very well. He's a really nice bloke. He's certainly someone, if I was running a team, he would be in the top sort of 4 or 5 names if you're going to call around and try and get someone in. I rate him highly. I just think he needs that win, and like you say, a win on merit rather than seeing someone, hand it to him as in, his teammate conking out or anything like that. It's what he needs, and as soon as he gets that, I think again he'll be away. So I don't think he's doing anything wrong at the moment. He's just needs to hang in there and just hope for a bit of luck.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on Sainz early days with my questioning on it, but I think what we can take from his qualifying pace, and he very nearly got pole position in Jeddah, he nearly got pole position in Bahrain, he was very close to his teammate, literally just less than a fraction of a second, and he was less than 10 seconds off Verstappen when he won in Jeddah. So the pace is there from Sainz. It's just perhaps Leclerc has gotten accustomed to this new car a little bit quicker, and Sainz just needs to find that extra tenth here or there when he can to really put himself amongst it. But he's certainly not too far away at all. I think it could literally just be a little bit more time, and who knows, maybe he'll win the Spanish Grand Prix in front of a home crowd. That would certainly
that'd be good.
That would certainly be a fun one. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we did have predictions at the start of the season, Ben, on this one, and I did say that I thought Carlos Sainz, George Russell and Lando Norris would all win their first F1 races this season. So I'm fairly confident on 2 of those. I'm not sure about the third one as of yet. But on
we'll get onto that in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. On the subject of Perez, just to draw back to that one, if we can, what have you made of his start to the season so far, Ben? Is this?
It's like last year, huh?
Really?
When he came in the team at 11th hour and did okay, but just didn't get the points. I think this time we're seeing him do better, but it's just been desperately unlucky. I think that's the problem with Checo, and I don't mean this in a nasty sense. He just seems to have a little bit of poor luck. Sometimes it's being in the wrong place at the wrong time, as in wrong team at the wrong time. He got that move to McLaren when McLaren were in the wrong place for him, and he just seems to be a bit unfortunate the way that his career has sort of plotted itself. That said, I think he was very fortunate to get the Red Bull drive at that stage of his career. And I'm desperate for him to win a race, or a couple more races, I should say, and just prove to the world just what a good driver he is, because he just needs it all to click together. And unfortunately, he just doesn't seem to have that opportunity.
Yeah, it seems that way at the moment, that luck seems to be the only obstacle for him, because I think he was certainly in with a shout of winning the Saudi Grand Prix if it wasn't for that safety car that obviously put Leclerc and Verstappen and Sainz ahead of him. I think he drove relatively well in Bahrain, he was a little bit off the pace compared to his teammate, but the margin, especially in qualifying, was a lot shorter than it was last season. And for me, I think if he keeps driving the way he is right now, again, early days, so of course a lot can happen.
Yeah.
I can't see Red Bull thinking or having a reason to not offer him an extension, and maybe they need to offer him something a little bit longer than a year for their own benefit. But of course, we've got the likes of Gasly, Albon, the likes of Yuri Rips and Liam Lawson knocking on the door as well for the future. So, yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts, guys, on this one with Red Bull? Do you think this is something that they may want to make a decision earlier in the season if Perez continues doing what he's doing?
I think with Perez, I think he should be really encouraged with, the qualifying pace in particular. I think that Perez has always had decent race pace. I mean, his tyre preservation is on a different level. His race pace is pretty good. It's just the qualifying in particular where he's really struggled with. So the fact he got a pole position in Jeddah could suggest that he's a lot more comfortable with this car. And as you guys have already said, if he continues performing at this level, then he should have no reason to worry whatsoever.
Same. I'd stick with him at this opportunity. I know Red Bull like to chop and change. I think it's a problem for Gasly. I feel a bit sorry for him. He seems to be, like we mentioned, Perez being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's a similar thing for him. Seems a bit stuck, doesn't he? I think all he's got to do is keep delivering decent results and then maybe put a little bit of pressure on Red Bull. But I think if I was Christian Horner, I wouldn't be looking to change my team just yet.
No, absolutely. And I agree with you. It does seem, unfortunately for Gasly, that this was a year that could potentially have opened the door for him to return to Red Bull. But based on what we've seen in the first couple of races, albeit, it's going to be a very, very hard case to argue against Sergio Perez if he keeps doing what he's doing for the time being. Just hopefully his fortunes become a little bit more positive in the upcoming races. Let's move on to some of the teams in the midfield, starting with Alpine. Now, I'm really fascinated by Alpine because even after what we've seen so far, I still feel that there's going to be more to come from them. Whether that means that they're going to be potentially challenging the guys at the front or perhaps Mercedes in the short term or just solidifying their position as seemingly the best of the rest right now. The only problem I have with Alpine is that their biggest enemy seems to be themselves. And I think we saw that in such a huge way in Jeddah to the point where the broadcasters completely ignored the battle at the front and just focus on these guys for the opening stages of the race. I mean, as enjoyable as that was to watch, Ben, how frustrating, well, from what you could hear from Alpine's perspective, how frustrating was that for them? Because, of course, they would have enjoyed them guys battling, but I personally feel that them two squabbling cost them an opportunity to try and race against George Russell last weekend.
I don't get what's going on there. I really don't. And I haven't for a number of years. I think go back to Renault or Lotus before, then go to Renault. They had massive potential to really crack it and get some decent drivers and move forward. They obviously secured the drivers which they thought were best for them. Let's see. I don't know if that necessarily was the right pairing, in my opinion. They just can't seem to get it right. And I don't know how to fix it. They've obviously had a change of leadership. Various different comings and goings in the team elsewhere. For some reason, it's just not clicking. And I think, those two fighting for position was also very strange. But I think that is just a little bit of frustration on both their parts. They want to be up there challenging for the win. That's what they've both been promised. As far as they were concerned, they would have a car that was going to be quick out the box and that they would be breaking into those top 3 or 4 places. And yet, here we are fighting for mid-table again. And it's not what either of those drivers want.
Well, I think it was Lauren Rossi, as you mentioned, with the issues with the management structure, that mentioned that they've been too conservative in recent years since that changeover from Renault a couple of years ago. And, that he wants to take a more aggressive approach with the racing and the development program at Alpine to try and turn them into a front-running team. And at the moment, well, I should say at the moment, I think a prime example of how I'm not convinced on that in the short term is the fact that Otmar Zafner, no disrespect to him, they seem quite happy to let the guys battle each other rather than just say, look, guys, just work together. You might be able to get after George Russell and the Mercedes because he wasn't far away. But if anything, it brought them closer to the likes of Magnussen, Bottas, Gasly and Hamilton rather than going forward. So, I mean, Courtney, what are your thoughts? Are you convinced that Alpine can sort of set things straight between the two guys and just work together, or are we going to see more of the same between them two? Because they seem to be having fun, but I don't think Alpine are really enjoying it if they don't get the results.
Yeah, if it does continue, it's obviously going to be damaging because with the with the development race that we're expecting to see this year, it's going to be intense. So you need to get optimal results because, in one sense they could they want to be higher up, but then they could find themselves falling behind particularly if the Mercedes manufacturers obviously sort out their issues, they could find themselves, having a likes of Aston Martin on their case and obviously McLaren more often. So they need to be getting optimal results. They do need to sort out between the two drivers. But if you think about the characters of both Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon, this is bound to happen. So I expect to see more of it.
Yeah, and you've got two drivers at different stages of their career looking to establish dominance in the team, so that if Alpine do get to a position where they're challenging at the front, they want to be the guy that's going to be getting all the resources and all the backing from the team. I mean, Ben, on the subject of Alpine, obviously the management structure, they've brought in Otmar Zafner, who has a proven track record of being able to get the most out of very little from his time at Force India and Racing Point. Less so at Aston Martin for different reasons. But do you think he's the right man to set Alpine on the right path?
I like Otmar. And like you mentioned, he did well at Force India. Is he the right man to lead that team forward? Probably not. I probably would have looked outside of F1 at other championships. There's not a name that I can give you who I'd have picked instead, but I just think that team needs shaking up. And I think that it needs fresh blood. Rather than taking someone that's been at a number of other teams, I think it needed someone new to the sport. I think what we saw at McLaren with Andreas Seidel coming in, I know they're not having a great time at the moment. I think last year was very good, but him as a person has been very good for McLaren and turning that team around. Zach Brown will get a lot of credit for it, but I think also Andreas Seidel deserves some praise for that as well. So that's the sort of figure who I would have gone for, someone from a different series to get things around, almost like Aston have done with Otmar's replacement. A guy that no one knows who he is really, with respect. That's Mike Crack, and he's been brought in to try and sort that team out. And can he do it? We don't know. It's too early days, but I just think that there is scope for picking someone else, just giving someone else a go, and that's what I would have done.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's much wrong in that, to be honest. I mean, I like Otmar for the same reasons. I think he's certainly a good acquisition for Alpine. Whether he's the right one, time will tell, but of course we'll have to wait and see. Based on what we saw in Jeddah, I don't know, perhaps a bit more of a stern approach might have been more appropriate in that race. But again, we can't judge it in isolation, I suppose. We'll have to, they've been good so far. Let's talk about Haas, if we can, because I have been really enjoying this new refreshed Haas. Obviously, since the departure of Nikita Mazepin, for obvious reasons, which we won't go into, bringing in K-Mag has proven so far to have been an absolute stroke of genius. I mean, it's been so fun to watch, and all I can really ask on this one, Ben, is can Haas keep up this level? Can Magnussen keep up this level that they've been driving at right now? Because it's certainly been fun for them.
Yeah, I would love to say yes. I just don't think they can. I think it's not a matter of them keeping up the pace. I think it's other people overtaking them. Yeah. We're into the development race, and of course, with that money gone, or that revenue source gone, with the potential of the Russians chasing for that money back, which I don't think is going to happen. But they need the money to keep developing that car. They focused all last year on making that car quick out the box, and I think that it is probably one of the most developed cars on the grid. But they've got to sustain that, and in order to do that, they need money. Where's the money coming from? There's still very few logos on that car. I think they've really got to pull their finger out and get some brands, and obviously the time to do it is now, while they're a hot topic, and hopefully we'll see some more sponsors on the car in Australia. But for whatever reason, they've never seemed to attract those big American brands that I hope they would. I wanted to see Haas with big brands on the car, and make lots of friends and colour and everything, and they've done that to a certain extent with Gunter and some of the people in the team, but largely they've been very. If you remember the first car that they painted it grey, and it was like so un-American. I wanted to see red, white, and blue, and everything else. So I just hope that they can attract some more money and keep it going.
I mean, it's an interesting point. Do you think that's down to Gene Haas's involvement, or perhaps lack thereof, because I know he doesn't want to invest a massive amount of money in the team, and it almost feels that even though it's got his name on it and it's an American team technically, it's felt more like a European outfit, more specifically a Swiss one, and it's felt more like Gunther Steiner's team than Gene Haas's team, and that's not necessarily a criticism, but it's almost when you've had the sponsors, someone said to me the other day, Haas have had so much bad luck with their sponsors in the last few years, like Rich Energy, for example, and Ural Kali, etc. So much bad luck with them. And I think, well, not necessarily, because if Gene Haas invested more into that team when they needed it, they wouldn't have to go chasing big money sponsors with either questionable morals, or the sources of their income are coming from certain areas that we're not going to talk about for obvious reasons. So I just feel like, what's your thoughts on this? Do you feel like whilst Haas can chase those bigger sponsors, that perhaps for the short term, their owner just needs to dip his hand in his pockets and just help the team whilst they're in a good place?
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with, he's now gone, but he was head of he might still be head of Haas PR. It wasn't Haas team. And who's Stuart, who I know very well, is a very good bloke. It was someone else, an American guy. And I asked him, I was like, come on, what's the goal? What's the ambition for this team? And he actually said to me, our ambition is to sell more machining tools in Europe. And I thought, that's a very, very boring answer. Like that's like most un-F1 and I said, so colour of the car. He said, we want we paint it grey. And after this is what he said, first 5 races, we want to be seen as just like a established part of F1, like we're not the new team, like we've been here forever. And I just thought, that's really rubbish. That is like it goes against everything that I was hoping that team was going to be standing for. They wanted to be grey, they wanted to be in the midfield, and they just wanted to increase machining tools in Europe. And I just thought, I just hope that mentality changes. And of course, had you had a different team principal, let's say Fred Vasseur, for example, or Franz Tost in that team, I think Haas would be a very dull team. And I think that, Gunther brings it to life. We've mentioned the Mazepin situation. We mentioned Rich Energy as well. It does seem to be like a soap opera at that team for very difficult reasons, and it does generate a lot of news. So I just hope that now, with Mazepin behind them, they've got, a good driver in K-Mag who's technically very, very good, very hard to overtake. And obviously Mick Schumacher, we don't really know how good he can be yet because he's been spending so much time at the back. But just hope it works for him. I really do. I really hope it works for him. But as I said to you before, they just need a bit more money.
Yeah.
And that's their biggest problem at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more, to be honest, that one. Courtney, on the subject of Mick Schumacher, of course, had a big crash, an expensive crash as well, $1 million, I believe it was quoted. Of course, that's money that Haas can't really afford to lose in a development race, even in a cost cap era where some of the teams still aren't spending up to that much. Just shows how difficult it is in Formula One sometimes to use that revenue and generate it, more importantly, as we've just talked about. Can we expect Mick Schumacher to shake off that? And it was a big shunt, we should say, so obviously we've got to bear that into consideration. But Haas obviously chose not to run in Jeddah the race after that collision. They had spare parts but thought better of it. Do you think Mick Schumacher can recover and perhaps get into a position where he might get some points this weekend?
Oh, 100%. He did a decent job with, which was by far, the worst car last season. We saw glimpses of brilliance from him. So they've now got the car to be in a point scoring position. He'll be more than capable of doing so. But the dynamic's going to be interesting because, Kevin Magnussen's come in and it's like he's never been away. So I think he's got a challenge on his hands with Kevin Magnussen. But look, it's been such a good news story, the Haas development. So, having Michael Schumacher's son, I don't know, getting a high point scoring finish or maybe a cheeky podium, in a chaotic race, that would really complete the fairy tale for Haas, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I'd certainly want to watch that race if that was to happen at some point. What would happen there? It might happen this weekend. Who knows? Let's move on to Alfa Romeo, another team that has, surprised us and, gone above their expectations in the early days, particularly with Valtteri Bottas's performance. Now, of course, in Jeddah, very unfortunate with reliability issues, but again, second race in a row, qualifying very well into the top 10 and racing competitively as well, almost challenging the top 6 at one point. So Ben, what have you made of Valtteri Bottas? 7.7, for lack of a better way of finding a better version.
Yeah.
He's he's driving with the handbrake off, isn't he? I mean, that's just he's much more relaxed. I spoke to him before the start of the season, and he was just so chilled out. It was unreal. I think that I spoke to him and I said to him, "Is this your chance now to enjoy yourself again?" And I didn't mean it in a nasty way, because he's obviously enjoying himself at Mercedes, but he was the de facto number 2, and I think that he's now got to a stage in his career where he wants to be number 1, and he's obviously able to take that role. He's the one that the engineers will be going to and saying, how do we improve this car? Again, I mentioned his feedback earlier on, the fact he didn't usually give much at Mercedes. Perhaps now is the chance for him to take on that role and start providing more and carrying that team. He's got the only rookie on the grid as his teammate, and they're going to be leaning on him a lot more than perhaps they would any other team. So I think that he's now got that experience. He's got that pressure off his shoulders. And he's just enjoying himself, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing now: a relaxed driver, a relaxed Valtteri. And it's good to see him up there, isn't it? And racing against Lewis at points. It's quite funny, but it's good. It's good. I'm pleased for him. He's a nice bloke.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that one, Ben. I do have a lot of time for Valtteri Bottas, and I mean, obviously not to go into too much details, but of course, Valtteri's had a difficult last few years. Of course, stuff in his personal life. Obviously, his worries about his future in F1, and driving year on year, trying to fight for your contract, even in a team like Mercedes, is obviously an unnecessary pressure for a driver that, on his day, was matching Lewis Hamilton for pace, at least on a Saturday.
100%, yeah, and that multi-year contract I forgot to mention was also part of it. The fact he doesn't have to worry now. Some people may think that means he won't have to try, but I disagree. I think that you'll get the better out of Valtteri once you see him relaxed, rather than put him on that year-on-year contract, which he was obviously on at Mercedes. So yeah, it's good. It's good for him.
Yeah, and I think with all due respect to Kimi Räikkönen, I think you're going to get a bit more out of Valtteri Bottas in that regard than Kimi Räikkönen, because I mean, Kimi was still operating at a fairly good level, but it was more Kimi on the yacht at Monaco just chilling and having a good time, rather than Kimi Räikkönen 2007 version trying to fight for a world championship with Ferrari. Guys, what have you made of Guan Yu Zhou so far? Because I don't think he's been too bad. I think he's actually exceeded expectations. I know the car is good, and obviously it's quite easy to look good in a good car, but I think Guan Yu Zhou, despite all of the interest of him coming into Formula One from his homeland in China, and obviously what that means from a revenue and sponsorship perspective for F1, I think so far he's actually done a relatively sound job. What are your thoughts on this one?
I mean, I don't know quite what happened in Jeddah with the mistakes with serving a penalty, but I think obviously, it was a bizarre one, wasn't it? But I think the fact that he's come in and joined a team like Alfa Romeo, it's a low pressure environment. So I do believe that there are other drivers that I would have much preferred to have joined Alfa Romeo. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, and he's doing a decent job. And Alfa Romeo right now have a decent package, so he has an opportunity to prove himself.
Yeah, snap for me. I totally agree. I would like to have seen other drivers get that gig, but he's got it. He's there. He's done nothing wrong so far. Let's see how we go in the next couple of races. I think that once Valtteri starts finding his feet a little bit more in that team, maybe it might be a different scenario. But let's see. We can only say what he's done so far, and that's been pretty good.
Yeah, and hopefully for his sake he can keep that up, because it's certainly an acquisition that Formula One will want to do well. For obvious reasons. So hopefully he can deliver on that and do a good job for the team as well. But as you said, Ben, a good point. When Valtteri gets settled in, it'll be interesting to see what Zhou can do to match him. On the subject of AlphaTauri now this is an interesting one, because AlphaTauri's biggest problem right now seems to be reliability. Obviously Gasly had the MGUK, it was the MGUK issue in Bahrain, and Tsunoda didn't even start because of issues that prolonged him in qualifying, and obviously further issues beyond that prevented him from starting the race. So, in tandem with that, the car is okay, but not necessarily spectacular on pace. So, what are we expecting from them this weekend? Because it's quite a tough one to call with AlphaTauri, because Gasly looks okay in qualifying. He's been in Q3 twice, and Gasly's a very good qualifier, probably one of the best on the grid. And Tsunoda's done okay so far when he has been able to race. So what can we expect from AlphaTauri this weekend, Ben?
Yeah, it's hugely disappointing, isn't it, for them so far? I don't know. I hope that they've sorted out some of their reliability problems. I mean, that's all we really hope for. Good driver pairing. You've mentioned Gasly. Tsunoda's a decent peddler as well, and I think that he will benefit from being a second season F1. I know he hasn't raced at Melbourne before, but I think that the experience that he got last year will hold him in good stead. I think if they sort that reliability issue out, then they obviously have potential to score some decent points. But at the moment, it's not looking very good, is it, when you look at that table?
Yeah, very much so. And obviously with some of their rivals in that midfield already scoring some big points already, it's started to look quite bleak for them early days on. They need to sort that reliability out. Courtney, with all that being said, with reliability in AlphaTauri, does this mean that someone like Pierre Gasly, who right now has no idea what avenues he might be finding for 2023 to stay in Formula One, whether that will still be with AlphaTauri or Red Bull or somewhere else, do you feel like he's now going to be under increasing pressure to maximise every opportunity he can get when the car is having a good day?
He will, but at the same time, we've seen in recent seasons that Pierre Gasly does get the big results for the team. Obviously most notably that win in Monza. Mm-hmm. So I think he's aware that he's well regarded in a paddock. After what happened at Red Bull, he could have just continued to being sort of demoralised and just found himself falling through the trap door, the Formula One trap door. But he's come along leaps and bounds. So if seats somehow become available next season, he will be in contention. But the problem is, will the seats become available? We've seen all it takes is for one driver to leave the sport for there to be a domino effect. But I do feel for him. I think the problem with the AlphaTauri is that they seem to qualify well, but the race pace, they seem to be lacking race pace. So I think the opportunities for AlphaTauri are going to be limited compared to some of these other teams.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. It's a tough one for Gasly, and he sort of feels like he has to take advantage whenever he can. It might be a bit early for silly season, but I'm going to ask you anyway while you're here, Ben. On the subject of Pierre Gasly, we've already talked about how difficult it might be to convince Red Bull to bring him back, especially if Perez has a good season. And, his seat at AlphaTauri may come under threat from drivers in Formula 2, the likes of Yuri Vips and Liam Lawson, who have started pretty solidly so far this season. So are there any seats really right now that Gasly could be looking at as a potential place to go for 2023 if he can't stay within the Red Bull program?
Not really, but as we mentioned there, as Courtney said, if you just have one driver go, then you get that domino effect. And of course, we do have some unknowns, shall we say, with some of the older drivers. We don't really know how far Lewis is going to go. Big question on Sebastian. I guess we've got that coming up in a minute. What's going to happen there, and of course Fernando. Will he still have the? He signed that contract. Will he still have the fight at the end of the year? And those three drivers for me, nearing the end of their career, if they were all to go or a couple to go, then that could shake things up. I think, I mentioned before, if he was a team boss, that Sainz would be on my list. I think Gasly would be on that list as well. In terms of an experienced driver, in terms of leading a team, they've done so many races now, and I think giving them that more senior role, which we've seen with Valtteri, which we were talking about just then. If you was to give him that opportunity, let's see what he could do, because I think he'd be pretty good in that particular role.
Yeah, very much so, and so many unknowns. And you're right, it probably, if there is a seat, it probably will come from a senior driver leaving the sport at one of those teams. On the subject of McLaren, a few races in, yeah, exactly, Courtney. I think that's the best way to sum it up. I mean, I did not expect, after the first two races, to be talking about McLaren being enthusiastic about an opportunistic P7 and looking so far down the order. I mean,
yeah, especially after that Barcelona test where they looked quite good. I'm not sure what happened between Barcelona and Bahrain for the test, but I know Danny Rick had COVID, which didn't help things because it was just Lando in the car. So sometimes it's good to have two different voices to get that feedback. a couple of races under the belt would have helped. Speaking to Lando, he says they know the issue, but then he was also conscious of the fact it could take months to sort out. And that's a big statement for him to make. You know, he's seen that team at the back and he's seen it move forward. And then to talk about it being at the back must be hugely frustrating for him, knowing how much work is required to get that team forward again. I think for me, though, the biggest issue isn't the lack of performance. It's the lack of performance of Lando's teammate, and that's Daniel Ricciardo. I think that he's been possibly the biggest disappointment that I can remember in a long time in Formula One. When he went to McLaren, I was super excited for that move for them. And I thought that was going to be it. That's going to be a really good signing, super confident, but it just hasn't come off. And he looks short of confidence. Okay, Monza aside, he looks short of confidence. If you watch Drive to Survive, and I know that we watch it and we laugh and it's edited, but there's so much in that where you see him almost looking broken. And I think that's, for me, the biggest concern. They've got to reignite that spark in that driver, because he is a bloody good racer. He gets his elbows out. He knows how to win. And they need to rediscover his passion and his ability, as well as obviously the car. So it's twofold. I think once they unlock the potential in the car, maybe that spark will come back, and maybe vice versa. If they start getting him positive and fighting for better places, then I think that you'll see the car improve as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good assessment on Ricciardo. I mean, last season, he admitted himself that he didn't really pay too much attention to the technical side of things in the way that some of the younger drivers have, and that's possibly been to his detriment last season. This season, of course, as you mentioned, Ben, he's struggled with COVID, and of course he's raced in the first two races, albeit with a lot less mileage under his belt compared to his teammate. But early days, it would suggest that Ricciardo, at least relatively speaking, is competing with Lando, albeit at the back of the field. I mean, is that a good sign, or is that too early to judge, given that McLaren are still quite a long way off the front where we expected them to be?
I suppose, you can only beat your teammate, can't you? That's the biggest benchmark. I just think that last season was so disappointing for him. And obviously that car clearly isn't any good at the moment. So that's my big thing. I just think they've got to sort those two problems. I think, as with Mercedes, who I mentioned earlier on, they know where the problem is. It's just rectifying that problem. And the only way you do that is by time, resource, and money. And they've got to chuck all those things at that car in the hope of trying to sort it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And, on the subject of Norris, of course, you rightly mentioned that he's had a lot to say on this new McLaren, not much of it good. And he's expecting the pain, as he was quoted in saying, to continue, and that there'd be more to come. I mean, how difficult... I mean, was he... how can I put this in the right way? I mean, given that this is a guy that signed last season a long-term deal to stay with the team, and of course he's seen them rise up the ranks to the points where they were on the fringes of challenging the big boys last season, after coming such a long way, how difficult must it be for Lando, in your opinion, right now, after signing that deal, to now all of a sudden be back at square one?
Yeah, because, I mean, when he signed that contract, it was before the launch, remember? And he hadn't driven the car, and it was all about showing his commitment to the team and, really happy. And it had only been 9 months since he had just agreed a new contract. So there was no need to do it. It didn't feel like there was a rush to do it. But for some reason, the team encouraged him to do it, and he did it. A lot of the team and senior figures also signed contracts at that time. And I presume it was with the hope that this car was going to be a mega. And that they would all come out of the box flying, and everyone would be going, wow, McLaren are back. And that's the only thing that I can assume. It's not based on what they tell me or anything. But in order to sign a 5-year deal, 5 or 4 year, I forget which it is now, a multi-year deal, shall we say, for a lot of money, you would need convincing. It's like, you wouldn't join I can see your West Ham thing there, and I'm to keep thinking about West Ham, but you wouldn't join a football club that are languishing in the relegation places.
No.
Thinking that you're going to get Champions League football in a couple of years, because it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Although I'm an Arsenal fan for reference there, Ben, so we're sort of up and down. But you can have a great day some days and then have a game like we did last night. So yeah, I can totally relate to a degree. But yeah, it's a good point on Lando, because for me, it kind of reminded me with the new regulation changes about the conundrum that Lewis had to commit his future to McLaren. And of course, he didn't. He decided to make the move to Mercedes, which at the time seemed like a backward step. And of course, history will tell us that that was far from the truth. And perhaps this is potentially another moment for Lando Norris. Of course, there were teams that were interested in Lando, how serious they were interested in bringing him in.
Yeah, it's like the Fernando Alonso move, isn't it? Every time you think he goes to a team, that's going to be the team, and then that team is the wrong team, wrong move at the wrong time, and I'm hoping that's not going to be the case for Lando.
Yeah, I really hope so, because he's proven last season he was absolutely mega, Lando Norris. So he's one of the drivers of the season, and hopefully he can be in the right machinery sooner rather than later. But regarding this weekend with McLaren, what are we expecting, guys? Are we expecting them perhaps to get points on merit? Because they weren't too far off in quali, but their race pace does seem to be a problem for them. So
no, I'm going points. And I'm going to hold points for both drivers.
Oh, that's pretty. I was going to ask you for a bold prediction at the end,
Ben,
but I think that might be it.
I'm confident. I think that Daniel's got something to prove. Home race. And Lando's a good peddler. I just think that hopefully that they've managed to sort some of those problems out in the gap in between the races. And I think that, I'm optimistic that they'll get points.
I love that phrase, by the way, Ben, a good peddler to describe racing. Yeah. I'm definitely going to have to borrow that one if you don't mind.
Okay, fair enough.
I love that. Courtney, what are you expecting from McLaren this weekend? Do you reckon they'll both get points this weekend, or perhaps it might just be Lando, or maybe Danny Rick on his home patch?
I agree. I do think they'll be in the points, but I think I'm looking at maybe 9th and 10th. And I think at this stage, considering where the car is, I think both drivers would take that.
Yeah, I think McLaren probably would take that as well. To another team that's struggling, probably more so than they would expected, Aston Martin. Now, Aston Martin were the first team officially to unveil their new car, if you don't include online renders. And there was a lot of hope and anticipation. I don't think they themselves expected them to be challenging at the front. I think that's more the longer term goal once their new infrastructure projects are completed over the next few years or so. But I think they were expecting to be challenging more for points rather than trying to avoid being at the back of the field. And they've been hit with a lot of misfortunes, albeit in testing they were okay. But losing Sebastian Vettel for the first two races of the season owing to COVID was obviously not something they would have hoped for. Fortunately, Seb is back, but I don't know about you guys. I don't think that's necessarily going to mean a change in fortunes for Aston Martin. Ben, what are you expecting from Aston Martin this weekend?
Yeah, they will never win the World Championship until they replace Lance Stroll, I'm afraid.
It's true.
You can chuck millions and billions and trillions at that team, but you need a decent driver in the car. And if you don't have one, then you're not going to win races. And it's as simple as that. So I'm not a Lance Stroll fan, as you can probably tell. He just constantly under-delivers, in my opinion. And I don't think he's the right man for that team. Whereas Sebastian, I felt, was a great signing for them. And it was unfortunate that he missed the first two races. But again, his commitment, is it there? Is it what it was when he was at Red Bull? Is it like it was when he was at Ferrari? I don't know. I don't necessarily know if he's currently in that right zone to lead that team forward. And of course, you are going up against the boss's son. So you're always going to be thinking, hang on a minute, am I in equal equipment? Because, it doesn't feel like it, or I don't know. It's just a strange dynamic. It just needs sorting out, doesn't it? If I was in charge, I'd pick two different drivers, but I'm not. And I don't know. Let's see if they can turn it around. There's a lot of people in charge there. There's a lot of people, Martin Whitmarsh back there as well. A lot of experienced heads. They're throwing money at it. It's just not working at the moment.
Well, this is it. I mean, there was a lot of changes in the second half of last season, particularly with Aston Martin switching focus over to the new car for this season. And as we've seen, evidently, everybody else has done the same thing, if not more than that. And they're ahead of them right now. And it's hard to see, this season at least, where Aston Martin are going to be able to make up that deficit. Now, of course, there are certain reasons to be cheerful. Of course, if these new cars are expected to deliver in terms of development, as we expect. The field might close up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've got the drivers in the car to deliver on that performance. And as you guys have already mentioned, Courtney, I know you're not a big fan of Lance Stroll either. I'm a little bit more sympathetic to him, but at the same time, I do feel that he turns up some days, but nowhere near enough to sort of warrant being a lead driver in that car.
He was leading. Was he leading in Turkey a few years ago?
Yeah.
And I think he's got a couple of podiums, hasn't he? I know he's got one.
Didn't he get one in Baku?
Yeah, that was his first one for Williams. Yeah. And trying to remember. I know there's another one. I'm just trying to remember where that is. Was that not in Turkey?
So I mean, that's an achievement, but that'll do. That's your lot, son. I felt. Off you go.
It was in Monza, and again, and this is a good point because this was a race that he probably should have won because he was at the front, and then he got a bad start, and he was jumped by Gasly and Sainz, and on pace in that car, he probably should have won that race. So it's a good point, and I think Aston Martin. I agree with you, Ben. I don't think Aston Martin will win a world championship whilst Lance Stroll is in that team.
No.
Whether we see that in the short term or medium term, I mean, it's going to be a tough call for Lawrence to make if he wants the team to be successful. But on the subject of Vettel, Courtney, should we expect too much from him in his first weekend back, or should we just let him see how things go? Because he seemed quite upbeat going into the start of the season before he contracted COVID. So, and he looked relatively quick, but are the fires still burning for Seb Vettel in his F1 career?
I think the situation at Aston Martin this weekend will actually benefit Sebastian Vettel in a weird way because, let's be honest, Aston Martin have been invisible. I think Aston Martin have become the Alfa Romeo of the grid. They're just they're merely existing, barely on camera because they're just trundling along. And you know what? In a weird way, that will benefit Sebastian Vettel because, he's going to come back from COVID. There's going to be question marks over his performance. But given how he's going to be a team that are going to do absolutely nothing, he can just sort of come in, get himself back into the groove and crack on from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's such a shame because it's a lovely looking car. You'd want to see more of it in a more positive position. But those are the brakes. Someone's got to be at the back, I guess.
Yeah.
Williams.
Speaking of which,
Williams.
I was just going to say, perfect segue. I mean, you've seen my notes, Ben, clearly for the show. Perfect segue to Williams, and I take no pride in this because I want Williams to be up there as well. I mean, I want everybody to be doing well. Yeah. I'm terrible for this. I just want everyone to be equal and have some fun, have their day. But Williams right now, again, another team with a lot of hope and expectation to try and make some progress, and yet they find themselves at the back, and I can't really see what they can do going forward. But let's try and look at some of the positives. Alex Albon, another opportunity to demonstrate that he's definitely capable in Formula One. Had a decent race, all relatively speaking, in Bahrain, less so in Saudi Arabia, including a collision with Stroll, which he was never going to make in a month of Sundays, that overtake, which has led him with a three-place grid penalty. What are we expecting from Williams this weekend, guys? Can they surprise us and maybe get into the points, or are they destined to be struggling at the back again?
Out in Q1, out of the points.
Yeah,
I just can't see that turning around so quickly. I don't know why. I like you. I want it to work out. I think Jos Capito is a good bloke, but it's just not working for him. Two okay drivers. Latifi is okay. Albon's still a bit of an unknown for me. He kind of got burned, didn't he, at Red Bull, and I feel a bit sorry for him. But he just needs a solid race, get a solid race done, finish it, and then let's see where we go for the next one.
I mean, it's a good point there, Ben. I mean, why do you think that is that Williams are struggling so much? Because as you said, there's a lot of good people there. They've got great facilities, reasonable amount of backing and support, more so from Mercedes this year with their increased partnership. So what is it something deeper at Williams that they're just not able to sort out? Because for me, it just seems that no matter who they seem to bring in lately over the last, 5 or 6 years since they were second in the Constructors' Championship, they just seem to be just nowhere. They're changing everything and yet coming up with nothing.
Yeah, I mean, there was a big gap under the previous owners, just in terms of experience and ability and technological development. And there were so many issues behind the scenes with Paddy Lowe going and everything else, and then obviously Claire and the family going. this was a wipe the slate clean moment last year, and in theory, everything should have been all sorted coming into this season. But there was lots of changes. Even from my point of view, there was a change in the communications department just before start of the season, and you're like, all this sort of stuff should have been sorted, well in advance. Very straightforward stuff. So if that's the case on that side, you wonder what's going on the engineering side and the development. And I don't know, maybe they just need to sort some stuff out internally, but I can't see it changing this weekend, I'm afraid.
Yeah, the nostalgic in me wants to see Williams at the front again. Growing up in the 90s and watching them was so good, but it certainly seems a long way away from where we are now.
I have this on my desk, see?
Iconic. Yeah, absolutely iconic.
It sits there and I look at it and think, oh, they were the days for Williams.
They really were.
Honestly, guys, I'm genuinely concerned that Williams will drop out of this sport soon. It'd actually be heartbreaking to see. But F1's brutal. It doesn't matter what name you carry. If you keep on languishing at the back, you lose sponsorship, you lose funding, and you struggle to stay in business. So I'm really worried about Williams. I really am.
And it's not going to get any easier. I mean, not to put another nail in the coffin at their expense, but as regarding Latifi, is the expectation or the positive for this weekend that if he can bring back the car in one piece?
Yeah, I mean, that says a lot, doesn't it?
I mean, it does. It's like Saudi alone. Like, he had a shot in qualifying that wasn't pleasant, but then in the race, it was like, I like Latifi, but it felt by his standards such a rookie error, but it's one that he keeps making again and again and again, and it's just, it's not going to help the team if they want to develop that car, if they keep having to try and pay for all the damages.
That's it. I mean, almost, in the same category as Stroll for me. He's obviously there. He brings a lot of money in the team, but I don't know. Sometimes you've got to make that choice, haven't you? That balancing act between money and talent. And I refer you to Haas and making that same decision. And the moment you pick talent over money, you seem to get points, and that speaks volumes as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, very much so. Now, of course, we've just run through all the teams, Ben, and what we like to do on this show at the very, very end of the podcast is we like to ask our guests to give their top 3 predictions for the race, the first, second, third, who they think will get on pole position, and to give us one bold prediction. Now, regarding the latter, I think McLaren's to get both in the points. I think you've done that one and nailed that.
Yeah, okay, fine.
So I'm going to ask you for who you think is going to be on pole and for your top 3 for this weekend.
Right, pole, Max. Win Max, second Sainz, third Leclerc.
Ooh, interesting. So you think Sainz is going to get the better of his teammate this weekend?
I think so, yeah. I think so.
Oh, that's very interesting. It'd be very good to see Sainz. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a bit surprised because I'm kind of leaning in the Leclerc camp. I've always kind of have, as much as I like Sainz, but he needs a strong weekend, and we've said that he needs to up his game a little bit, and that might be all he needs to do, just get that one result, and perhaps it could be this weekend. Courtney, what do you think? Are you in agreement with Ben, or do you feel that we could have a different top 3 in pole position this weekend?
My prediction is quite specific. Okay, so with Australia, we've seen traditionally safety cars be a real feature of the race. So I reckon that Max will get pole. I think we're going to see Max and Charles Leclerc, typically battling, having a close battle, and Carlos Sainz is going to go for a different strategy. Okay, Latifi's going to beach the car. There's going to be a safety car, and Carlos Sainz is going to win. So I'm going to go Carlos Sainz first, Max second, Leclerc third.
Do you know what, Courtney? It's moments like that where I'm really glad I asked you to do this podcast with me a couple of years ago. That is, and I can really see that happening. Just every bit that involves Latifi bins it, safety car, and then chaos ensues after that one.
I think chaos could be a good thing because it's they've had a shift, haven't they? In the times that we've got, the daylight saving time, and I think it's getting dark there around 6 o'clock, and the race is still quite late. So we could see a few curveballs and elements like that. If we, it wasn't that long ago, we had to race on, qualifying was on the Sunday, wasn't it? Because due to
yeah. Stuff. Well, this is it, yeah. And we're going to see all kinds of strange differences, especially when we go to Vegas on a Saturday for that race. George Russell might prove to be Mr. Saturday that night. You never know. It's a long way away, but certainly one to think about. I'm going to go. I'm going to go a bit different. I'm going to go with Leclerc to win. For some reason, I just think, I don't know, Ferrari might have learnt a lot from Jeddah. I think on setup, whilst it was a good choice, I think ultimately that probably cost them in the battle between those two, going a bit too much on downforce. But I think this circuit might suit them a bit better than the Red Bulls. We'll have to wait and see. So I'm going to go with Leclerc to win. I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz to get on pole position. I think he's been very close in Bahrain and in Jeddah, and I think he's going to put it all together this time round. So I'm going to go with Sainz pole, Leclerc to win, Verstappen second, and I'm going to go for Carlos Sainz in P3. And my bold prediction, yeah, you know what? I'm going to borrow yours, Ben. It was so good, and I want to see it happen. So, yeah, both McLarens to score points. Courtney, did you give a bold prediction? I know there was a lot in yours, so, yeah.
I think Lewis is going to get himself in the mix. I'm going to go with at least a top 5 finish for Lewis Hamilton.
I think that's a pretty solid one.
Yeah, not a bad bet, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, not a bad one at all. Okay, great. Well, I think that's pretty much all we've got time for. Ben, obviously, thank you so much for joining us on the show. For the benefit of our listeners and those that watch this podcast on YouTube and haven't heard or seen your articles before, where can they find you?
In the newspaper. I'm at The Sun, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is Ben J Hunt, I think, on Twitter. I have no idea what it is on Instagram, but you'll probably find it on my Twitter.
No problem. Well, I'll definitely leave them in the description anyway for those that watch it on YouTube. So be able to find you. Nice little click on the link there as well. Of course, guys, if you have enjoyed this episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast on YouTube, you know what to do. Give us a like. That really helps us out a lot. And also consider subscribing to the channel as well. If you are listening to us on your favourite podcasting platform, you can give us a nice little review. For those of you that give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, we will reward you with a shout out on the next DNF1 F1 podcast episode. So I guess all that's left to say, guys, is until next time, please stay safe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. Take care.
See you soon.